Hello and welcome to this third webinar hosted by the Press Institute of India and UNICEF. I'm Sanjay Pinto on behalf of Shubhato Roy, Sashi Naya and Sushmita. A very warm welcome to all of you. It's a sad and frightening statistic. Every 15 minutes, a child is said to be abused in India. By the time this webinar is over, at least 4 or 5 children will be victims. Think about it. The National Law School Bangalore, which analyzed 667 judgments between 2013 and 2015, just 2 years, revealed that alleged victims turned hostile in 67.5% of the cases and testified against the accused in only 26.7% cases. Why has this been happening? That's not all. The Kailash Satyarthi Foundation's did an analysis of the pattern of disposal of POCSO cases by the police from 2017 to 2019, based on data published by the National Crime Records Bureau. Between 2017 and 2019, 2/5 of POCSO cases, the police after investigation without filing the charge sheet. Is this because most victims are poor and marginalized and turn hostile during the trial due to coercion or inducements? The conviction rate may have gone up marginally over the years, but it still hovers around 30%, which is a cause for concern. Ladies and gentlemen, a law is only as good as its implementation. And its implementation hinges on key definitions. The Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, commonly known as POCSO, bristles with practical difficulties. As always, we have a panel of relevant experts. Mr. Shankar Jiwal, IPS Commissioner of Police, Chennai, will be joining us very soon, straight from a meeting. Justice N.S. Vimala, retired judge of the Madras High Court. Bharti Lakshmi, principal of Hindustan International School. Sudha Ramlingam, senior advocate and activist. Ganesan Kumaresan, child protection specialist at UNICEF. And Joanna Joshua, a school student. Let me first go across to Justice Vimala. Lordship, thank you very much for joining us. I know you had a power failure at home, but you still somehow made the effort to join us. My first question to you is this. Privacy and confidentiality of victims were the two primary objectives of the POCSO Act. That was the legislative intent. In your opinion, has that been adequately reflected in the statute? Because if survivors are to be emboldened to speak up at a very practical level, shouldn't the Act be urgently amended to necessitate suspension of the alleged offender within 24 hours, of course, after a preliminary inquiry, external evaluation of answer scripts assigned to offenders, and if sought, admission in another school of the same board at any time during the academic year? I mean, these are the concerns that parents and students, the victims may have. Do you believe that this should be factored into the Act through an amendment, ma'am? Justice Vimla, ma'am, if you could unmute yourself and answer that. Okay, as always, you seem to be having some technical problems at the start. If I could go bounce that off to Mrs. Sudha Ramlingam, senior advocate and activist. Sudha, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Ma'am, if I can bounce that question that I asked Justice Vimala, I think she's having some connectivity issues. The legislative intent of POCSO was initially twofold, privacy and confidentiality of the victims. So do you believe that at a practical level, to embolden victims to complain, we need to have three things, maybe through an urgent amendment? One, immediate suspension of the alleged offender after, of course, natural justice, after a preliminary inquiry, external evaluation of the answer scripts of the victim, and perhaps even automatic admission in another school of the same board. Are these practical suggestions that can be woven into the Act, ma'am, through an amendment?
I think what you're telling is really relevant and important too. But should it be woven into the Act is $1 million question. I feel everything can't be actually put in inside the Act itself. See, there should be so many things which could be interpreted also. And the necessities be brought in with more sensitization and also by teaching people how to react to these situations and ensure that there is immediate action. I always feel conviction at the earliest possible time is more important than simply thinking about arresting a person, suspending a person, keeping them in bay for years together, and eventually, if only they get acquitted. What is it that's happening? So we also know this is a country where Satyameva Jayate is only in our motto, not in our actions, not in our complaints. Definitely, there are also cases where it's not an honest revelation of facts. So we will have to be doubly careful, especially when you are shifting the burden of proof also on the accused. The entire criminal jurisprudence is changing as far as these special acts are concerned. So if you are going to weave in such very, very stringent provisions, that I don't think is more, I don't think it will serve purpose because of the nature in which our entire jurisprudence works. So what we really need is speedy investigation, speedy trial and conviction. Get the conviction immediately and get them out of, you can actually terminate the services, you can dismiss the person.
My question was in terms of inspiring confidence in victims so that they will not feel that they could be subjected to vendetta. This is more like sort of an interim measure, like, interim immediate relief for the victim to shelter them away from the accused.
If that were so, then you should also ensure that the trial gets over in a very time-bound manner.
Absolutely.
60 days to 90 days.
Absolutely.
It cannot be more than that. If that is also woven into it, what you said could also be included by way of an amendment.
Okay. Let's see if we can go across to Justice Vimla now. I know the power fluctuations at her residence, of course, due to the monsoon. Justice Vimla, ma'am, Lordship, can you hear me? If you could unmute yourself, please. Justice Vimla, ma'am. Okay, I think there are still some technical issues there. Sudha, ma'am, if I may continue with you, please. Ma'am, there was justifiable outrage not very long ago in Chennai, especially, and the nature of public discourse also, unfortunately, strayed into extraneous areas like caste and religious whataboutery and all that, ostensibly stemming from a lack of awareness about the POCSO law. For the benefit of the audience that I'm told comprise students and teachers and parents, there are three broad categories of offenses: sexual assault, sexual harassment, and abetment and concealment under the POCSO Act. This is for the lay audience. Now, ma'am, unlike the regular criminal jurisprudence, where you have the presumption of innocence, Section 29 of POCSO stipulates a presumption of guilt for sexual assault. Now, if this shifting of the burden of proof to that of innocence is such a significant advantage for the prosecution, why is it still challenging to get convictions? Because I read out the statistics from the Kailash Satyarthi Foundation. Why are we still not getting enough convictions or swifter convictions as you had envisaged?
That's really interesting. See, what happens is whatever said and done, conviction can only be on the basis of tangible evidence. Evidence should be there. Otherwise, that it would end up in, it will kill natural justice. So definitely the criminal law, even when you shift the burden of proof, it does not mean that there is a presumption that the person has actually committed the offense, and you will have to straightaway convict him. So the conviction only depends upon the proof, upon the evidence which is produced. How far is the evidence being produced really susceptible to the scrutiny of law? So that's what is happening. What happens is most often than not, complaints are given in a hurry, and complaints are drafted very in a very shoddy manner, one. Secondly, it is most often than not, it is delayed. It's not given immediately. And our forensic evidence is not as much as we would like it to be for various reasons. And there is absolutely very little scientific investigation done. We still go by word of mouth. We still go by some external, by oral evidence more than scientific evidence. And also there is this fact of most of these cases being emanating from within the families. So as time runs by, there are other external factors, others who go and say, now, do you really want him to be convicted? Are you going to get anything done? So various factors make these witnesses turn hostile. that's one of the main reason why there's so much of acquittal than conviction that we would like it to be.
I've got a school student here, Joanna. Very brave of you to have appeared on the show, Joanna. More strength to you and to other classmates of yours. For a school student, one of the many fears and hurdles to complain against a sexual predator, I would imagine, could be the risk of your examination marks being fudged. Is that a major fear among your classmates?
No, that's not a major fear. I feel like some of the fears that are there among our students is, one is opening up about it. I feel like there's a lot of fear that of the shame that we undergo when people, that's what I've heard, when you open up about what you've been through or what people have done to you. I feel like there's a lot of shame involved in that. And another reason that I really feel, and from what I've heard from my friends and my classmates, is the fear of people telling you that it's your fault, that something happened to you.
What they call gaslighting. Absolutely. I mean, that's actually very sad. Speaking of the so-called shame, actually, the shame should be on the offender, not on the victim. Yes. But I get what you're saying. Absolutely. I mean, I completely empathize. Have you been advised on safe and unsafe touch in school? If so, in which class? Now you're in class 10, right? So in which class have you been told about safe and unsafe touch? Have you been counseled by your parents or some external counselor who's brought to the school, or your teachers? Who has done this, if at all?
Yes, definitely. There are a lot of awareness programs in our school that have been conducted. We have had awareness programs when I was even in junior school, and my parents have taught me a lot. Safe touch is when you feel safe, when you feel loved by people. And an unsafe touch is when you're uncomfortable, when you feel nervous around someone, when you feel uncomfortable. And these social awareness programs that have been conducted in our schools have been conducted from an early age, not just in high school, which I think is really important to know at a very.
So in your case, you're in class 10. When was this conducted? The safe touch and unsafe touch. When was this program conducted?
Safe and unsafe touch, I think about 3rd grade and 4th grade.
Okay, as early as that.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I hope other schools also emulate this. I'm just curious, do students in your class of your age, do they discuss instances of abuse with each other? Do they confide in each other, or it's always only a particular teacher, class teacher, or maybe only the parents, or perhaps an elder sibling at home? Who do you confide in? I mean, if you ever have to face something uncomfortable.
Yes, a few classmates of mine have actually confided in these awareness programs. It creates a very safe platform within the school, and it kind of helps them to open up. And yes, a few people have confided about what they've gone through. And the first person I feel that I would go and confide in is my parents, but it depends on how close your relationship is with them, and that plays a major role in whether you confide to people or not.
I think that's so important. I think young Joanna has made a very, very important point there. And I think for parents who are listening in, your children should look up to you as friends apart from parents, and they should be comfortable enough to confide in you no matter what the situation is. I think that's a very, very important takeaway from our youngest panelist today, Joanna Joshua. Let me go across, hold that thought, Joanna. Let me go across to a principal and a parent, Bharti Lakshmi, who is the principal of Hindustan International School. Bharti, thank you for joining us. Can you unmute yourself, Bharti, please?
I have, Sanjay. Thank you for having me over here.
Thank you, Bharti. Always a pleasure. Now, in extreme cases, what could really be a daunting reality is finding a new school in the middle of an academic year. Let's say if the environment is vitiated, you complain against a teacher, a senior teacher perhaps, and after calling out an offender, if the family decides that a new terrain is better, less hostile, with less hostile undertones, this big mismatch between the magnitude of sexual crimes is the reason for victims suffering in silence and bottling up their misery. Is this something that you have come across as a principal and a parent?
Not as yet, but of what I've heard in the past few months which have happened, it's very important for a teacher primarily to be attentive to what the child is saying. You know, when you become a teacher, Sanjay, it's not just about teaching in classrooms or going and giving the lessons, but it's more about connecting with the children. And for me, God bless, it's been a beautiful relationship with the children, where the children have had the courage to come and open up to me and speak about those things which have feared them. So that was a good.
So, and you've been in various schools. Are you saying that various students have come and opened up to you?
Yes.
In the past, they have.
In the past.
Okay.
See, the awareness now is
in your capacity as the principal or as a class teacher or as somebody who's taught them over the years?
As both as a teacher and as a headmistress, as the middle management, what you call, they have opened up and I've had the courage to take action. Okay. So that has given them that confidence that yes, there's someone here for me who will speak up for me, who will stand for me. So that was about years ago, but now I noticed that the awareness is more. And with all, as Joanna mentioned, with all the counseling sessions and with the parents becoming more aware, and I would say becoming aware and alert. And in a school atmosphere, it's not just the teachers and parents, but everybody who's associated, right from the watchman or the ayah or the peon, everybody has to be, aware of this. That, a child is very precious and you got to deal or respect him for what he or she is. And that gives the confidence to the child to say that, okay, I'm in a very safe environment. And if something goes wrong also, I have the liberty and confidence to go and speak to somebody about it. So that environment, creating that environment is of extreme importance.
Bharti, let me ask you a very frank question, especially after the recent cases in Chennai were highlighted in the media and the social media amplified there. Have complaints under POCSO changed the guru-shishya relationship, the teacher-student relationship? Are teachers today more on their guard, perhaps scared to discipline students, fearing some sort of legal backlash? What has been your experience?
No, it has made us a bit, as you call the word fear, it has made us a bit more cautious, a bit more worrisome. But then I think it's suppose a whole package which we should have remembered from eon, as the teacher is always a guru in the Hindu tradition who's looked up to almost as God. So once that thought is seeped into you, probably this fear wouldn't come now. It should have been there. A bit of fear always acts as a bit of matter of reverence.
And therefore, the responsibility is much higher. When students look up to you as God, the responsibility to do no harm to them, even if you can't do good.
Exactly. So all that I remember is a teacher is always a mother at school and a mother becomes a teacher at home. So when these two complementary roles are, played to a beautiful perfection, you know how respected you are. And, you will not take any chances with spoiling that.
Okay, absolutely. That's very well put, Bharti. Let me try and go across to Justice Vimla. Justice Vimla, ma'am, are you able to unmute yourself now? I told there's some technical difficulty you're facing.
I think I have succeeded.
Perfect. Yes, ma'am. I can see you loud and clearly. Yes, absolutely. Such a pleasure to have you, Lordship. Thank you very much for joining us. We all know you as a very compassionate judge. In fact, I've had the privilege of appearing for you only once, sadly, due to my lateral entry. Ma'am, I was asking Mrs. Sudha Ramlingam some questions about the POCSO Act and the legislative intent earlier. Yes. How do you view, ma'am, Section 29 of POCSO, against which is, talks about the burden of proof shifting, burden of innocence, as opposed to burden of guilt, presumption of guilt in this case, as opposed to presumption of innocence. How do you view this Section 29 of POCSO against the constitutional guarantees in Article 21? Because the presumption of innocence is an essential feature of a fair trial.
Yes, sir. The accused is always presumed to be innocent unless the prosecution establishes the guilt. That is the basic and the golden principle. That is what is claimed by all others. But the children have a special difficulty in identifying the offense event and disclosing the event, the offense, describing the offense. Everywhere the child has the difficulty. That is why the legislature thought it fit as a measure of special protection to children and to combat the crime against children has given this special presumption. Even then, the Supreme Court, considering the constitutional guarantees already available to the accused persons, have certain extent has diluted those provisions and have given a dictum that there must be a basic proof for the main ingredients of the offense. Only then the court will be entitled to invoke the presumption. That is how the balancing act has been given by the dictum of the Honorable Supreme Court. Yet we see that a lot of cases ends in acquittal because of the basic lacunae in the act itself and the procedure and the systems. Loopholes are there everywhere. As usual, loopholes are taken advantage of. That is why even the presumptions do not work here.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me go across to Mr. Ganesan Kumaresan, who is a child protection specialist at UNICEF. Mr. Kumaresan, thank you for patiently waiting for your turn. I saw some of your comments and questions as well. It's good to have that discussion going on. My question to you is, how many people do you think are aware that it's not just a school or an institution that can report the alleged crime to the police station? Because Section 19 places the onus on any person. The term uses any person who has an apprehension or knowledge of an offense committed or likely to be committed. Do you think there is general awareness of society that anyone can really actually bell the cat?
You're right, Sanjay. Good evening to everyone. That's the mandatory reporting is, not very well, in fact, that kind of across to all the people in the state. And the 10-0.
Would you mind, Mr. Kumaresan, would you mind switching on your video, please?
Actually, sometimes it goes off the video.
Yeah. Yes. Now we can see you. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
so I was asking you about the awareness about anyone being a complainant. So this could be whistleblowers, it could be classmates, it could be seniors, it could be other teachers and parents, it could also be old students. Like in one case, the Alumni Association rallied together.
Siblings, even siblings. See, the children at the risk of now, if you look at it, the violence against children, it happens in all three settings right now. Family, institutions, and community. And anyone who rightly comes to know that's happening, I think the mandatory reporting is that area. Still a lot more work needs to be done. We have been working. In fact, that is what, the 10-098, the kind of promotion, you must have seen now all the digital boards in Chennai now. Chennai Corporation has allowed the Childline India Foundation to put the ad. So we are also doing that similar in all the schools. We are asking the police officials, the districts, special juvenile police unit members being trained in some of the districts, especially high priority districts, to take a session in the schools and also promote that kind of childline number. Right now, in fact, whenever the children is being told this, if you come across or if you happen to be involved or it's been violence against children or by the children, these are the number. These are the facilities that are available in the state. I think that area, I don't say it's not there, it's there, but still a lot more need to be done. It's not more need to be done in strengthen. In fact, we are working closely now, Judiciary Academy, and calling all the stakeholders together. You know very well, Sanjay, child protection issue is not just one person can have. It's almost 10 to 12 stakeholders are there. Start from the state level to the district level up to the grassroots level. Even the village level child protection committee supposed to act as a vigilance kind of watchdog committee. If the village level child protection committee is being activated, all the villages, around 12,363 village level child protection committees been formed. We are taken as one of our mandates with the government of Tamil Nadu to see that in another 6 months, we should at least in the 6 high priority districts where this committee is activated. So it will act as a village level watchdog committee. So
let me bounce off both the student and the parent and principal here. Joanna, if you come across or if you experience a case of abuse, are you aware of how you should complain? Has the school given you, for instance, an email ID or any complaint box, especially in the last few months after these cases flared up in Chennai?
Yes, they've. What I've been taught is that we have to call 1098. That's the child helpline. Is what we've been taught.
Okay. What about Bharti? What about you?
Actually, apart from the child helpline number, Sanjay, what we've done is we've a special Google form where the letter goes directly to the director of the institute, to the management. So the child, and this has been across to all the classes, right from grade 1 to 12, the awareness has been given to parents. So the child has the liberty and freedom to approach directly to the management in case such an incident occurs.
Okay, and this happened when? Soon after these cases came up, or was it there and moved earlier?
Initially, there was awareness. The children were told, but this came up immediately after the incidents happened.
So a complaint, a proper mechanism has been put in place the last few months. So something good has come out of this outrage that took place.
If I may, Sanjay, I wanted to revisit the
yes,
In fact, I met you when I was actually working in Dan Sachs when Supriya Sahu was the director. And remember, you must have, you can recall that the life skills-based education, the 12 hours which was done in that period in all the schools, it has got a tremendous scope for the peer-to-peer learning, the peer-to-peer support system, 2 model teachers being trained on those sexual health issues. I think that needs to come back now. I think the present education department is working on it to revisit those curriculum and then include the current issue. Then how do you bring back to those 2 model teachers concept? Because I sincerely feel in Kerala, if you look at it, every school has got a student counselor and also teachers being trained. We work very closely with the police department in Kerala, looking at the children at the school itself, identifying the deviant behavior in the schools, and it's the kind of teachers being trained. I know my child kind of trained. Every teacher will know about every child in the school, in the class, their deviant behavior, they will segregate it into the mild and moderate and severe, and are trying to address through peer learning system, also the external support system. I'm planning to introduce that UNICEF with the government. We are planning to introduce this. I think we are advocating. I think we soon will be coming in. Unless otherwise, every school knows, as you rightly said, I think Jana was saying that 1009 is sufficient. But what happens is the promotion of the particular number and the service delivery system has to go hand in hand with the quality of the service system. What happens after the rescue of the child? Whether the child was able to continue the education, whether the child has been given a space for the rehabilitation, all those areas which, there is a lot of areas and a lot of stakeholders, actors, they have to come together and work together for the benefit of every child in our state. And Sanjay, I also wanted to say before I'm taking last point, this parents, we see how much time we are giving quality time with our own children. I really wanted to make use of this opportunity. I've been advocating it for the parenting adolescents. It's not easy now. You know very well, third generation issues are creeping up in both the southern states, especially the Kerala and Tamil Nadu. How the parents are being equipped to handle those issues at home. How much of time or space we create our own children. As my previous speaker was saying, speak up culture. We are saying one side, we are saying speak up culture, right? When the child wants to talk about, the first primary stakeholders are parents. Then there comes to the teachers. But are we having an enabling environment in our every house? I think the parents needs to be also to be trained and also being told what is a quality time means. Quality time is not taking the children to the mall or beach or whatever they want, they're buying them. Being with them and ensuring that the children feels comfortable to open up their issues. Otherwise, I've been facing this for the last 20 years because I started my career in HIV. Now I moved to child protection. Everywhere.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, Mr. Kumaresan. I always say that quality, that, take home should not just be viewed through the prism of a salary. Take home should be in terms of quality time that you're giving your family, your children especially.
Exactly.
Sudha ma'am, if I may come across to you, it's an intricate legal query that I want to pose to you. The POCSO Act, ma'am, lays down significant emphasis on reporting offences, that it even penalizes non-reporting, 6 months imprisonment and fine for individuals, twice that penalty for institutional default. So if a school doesn't report it, then that's twice that penalty. Now, how does one interpret the term knowledge of the occurrence of offences? Does it necessitate written complaints or oral complaints or third-party information passed on? Because the Act is surprisingly silent on this aspect. Although it lays down a mechanism on reporting cases to the police, it's silent when it comes to whether complaints should be written or oral.
But once they say knowledge, it would definitely mean it need not be written. It could also be oral. If they come to know, then it has to be acted upon. So how do you get to know? It could be even by hearsay. It need not even be the specific complaint. But once you get to know such offences being committed or has been committed, then immediately you'll have to ensure that the law sets in motion. But unfortunately, whether it is this in cases of POCSO or even otherwise, what we say is even after giving written complaints, setting law in motion is a very big issue in this country. And when the knowledge itself is sufficient to punish the hearing officer if action is not taken, it is a very serious thing and it is a serious offense. But definitely we'll have to sensitize the officers and ensure that the term knowledge means even oral complaint. And it need not be in the form of a complaint. As I rightly told you, it could even be a hearsay. It is a duty of the officer to investigate. See that.
What about schools? What about schools, ma'am? Let's say X school gets an oral complaint from a child. And then if they don't act on it, of course, there are penal consequences. What if there is no complaint made? And later on, there is something they say, no, we informed you. Then it becomes he said, she said.
You you need not wait for a complaint at all. Once you get to know that such and such thing is happening, then immediately they'll have to say, start acting on the complaint. Let them first make a preliminary investigation. Let them convince themselves that there is something happening. Immediately let them prefer a complaint. And if it is a school and institution which gets to know about it, they can put it in writing also. They need not even go to the officer. They can even send it through emails these days. You need not wait for personal attendance and interview being made possible by the police officer concerned. So
absolutely. Now you have the Evidence Act also, 65B. Emails also are evidence. Let me bring in Justice Vimla here, ma'am. Justice Vimla, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Lordship, under the defining section 2.2, there is a reference under defining section of POCSO. There is a reference to falling back on definitions in the Indian Penal Code, the Juvenile Justice Act, and the Information Technology Act to address any gaps. However, the term knowledge, I realized, is not defined either in the IPC or in statutes or the Juvenile Justice Act or the Information Technology Act. Isn't this a big loophole, ma'am?
No, sir. What I feel is the term knowledge is rightly not defined because depending upon the context, content, and color of the event, and we must be able to interpret it to the extent that we should be able to give justice to the child. Therefore, knowledge need not be defined. And the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights has given an application called POCSO e-Box. When the matter relates to cyberbullying or morphing of images or anything like that, this kind of crimes, children can straight away download this POCSO e-Box and they can send straight across the message. They need not be afraid. They need not have the fear of approaching anybody that is being witnessed by somebody. That may be the practical fear the children may have. And because of that, the government has also given certain applications, and the NCPCR has given this POCSO e-Box application. And if we give them some kind of awareness that these are the facilities available, I think children will be in a better position to use it. Today's children are nowadays very, very courageous. They are very much concerned with other people's...
and they are tech savvy, because my 10-year-old twins teach me a lot about the computer. I mean,
rightly said.
They are very tech savvy, absolutely.
Techno-savvy. And therefore, yes, without even waiting for their parents for their help, they can use those kind of applications.
Absolutely. Ma'am, we are happy to be joined by the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Shankar Jiwal. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I know it's been a hectic schedule that you've been having. In spite of that, you've kept time for us. It shows the attention you are giving to this important issue. Sir, if I ask you first, how many cases, POCSO cases, have been registered by the Chennai police, let's say in the last 6 months?
Sandeep, thanks for inviting me in this particular webinar of yours. I believe, first of all, definitely this is one topic which needs to be discussed and vivisected further for not only the attention that the police as of now is paying to this, but particularly judiciary also is very much also attentive to this particular issue. Apart from the fact that this is one particular aspect of enforcement and law enforcement, where the psychology of a particular section, that is victims in specific and some of their relatives, is likely to be marred apart from the criminal part of it we just investigate. There's got much deeper significance and ramifications. Coming back to your question, like how many cases, there has been an uptrend. Actually, if you see in last 6 months, we have almost like 230 plus, to be precise, 22 cases. There's been uptrend, and definitely as to why this trend is up, there are different reasons for that. One of them is that we do ask our officers, especially the Almond police station staff, to see that when a complaint comes, it is taken to a logical end by immediate inquiry into it and registration of FIR, which has led to upsurge. A bit of education, a bit of awareness is also helped in this aspect.
Precisely what steps has the Chennai police taken to inspire that confidence and to embolden victims to come forward and complain? I mean, at the police station level, how sensitive are they when it comes to dealing with complaints under POCSO?
So this has always been a topic where the police has been sort of has come in for a flag on behalf of the different parts of society, saying that the cases don't get handled properly and sometimes even registration is not there. We are sensitive to this issue, this particular aspect of POCSO and prevention of harassment of women. In these two aspects, we have been training our staff. We have been orienting our staff to, first of all, go into the exact legal provisions of the act. So if we say POCSO, if you see, definitely some of your webinar participants will be experts on this. I won't try to elucidate on this, but this has specific provisions, like it says that how to handle the victim, it says how to examine the evidence, how to present it before court. For court also there are few directions as to the handling of the case, etc. So we are trying to sensitize, educate our staff on this particular aspect very seriously, which has led to certain improvements. One of the major aspects is that this is a multidisciplinary enforcement or regulation as such, where the child welfare committees have a major role. We are trying to see that the CWCs do play that aspect which is assigned to them in a serious way. And actually speaking, nowadays we are getting almost about half the cases being referred from CWs. And third aspect is that being it's like Chennai city has large number of government police stations, and we're going much more number of government police stations. Like few ranges didn't have. This time CM has announced that we're going to be having more number of these stations. One of the aspects is to streamline the thing of standardization. So we have worked on a SOP in association with judiciary, also the JJB of one of the High Court judges attached with that, and both the institutions of Judicial Academy. So our DC Crime Against Women, she has gone through a detailed procedure of drawing a SOP, which will also standardize things a bit, definitely with leeway for the enforcement to take place.
That's an interesting point you're making, sir. I mean, so there's an SOP, there's a standard operating procedure that the Chennai police has come up with to deal with POCSO cases. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, as I said, like this is what has come up with the constitutional stakeholders primarily. Actually, we started this about a month and a half back, but the judicial stakeholders, they wanted some more time in this, and it went through their academic plus the legal fraternity scrutiny, and now we have a SOP ready. I don't say that it is cast in stone. So definitely there will be plus minus, give and take. Trade-offs are always there.
So has this been shared, sir? Is this there for public consumption now, the SOP? If you could tell us what are the salient features of this SOP?
It is not shared as of now. I think it is just ready. And your webinar, I think, is the first time that we are speaking about this SOP actually. Okay. And we will be bringing it out in about, I think this week itself, we'll be bringing this out. And salient feature wise, we are not doing anything new. We are trying to say stepwise what is required. There are few changes in the legal analysis and perspective of this as well. And then a checklist part of it, which is important, that when an investigating officer goes for investigation, how does he or she checklist the important parameters? So it is a step-by-step stuff, multidisciplinary approach in SOP, but SOPs get lost because of the language and sometimes legal tussles and things there. So we have made a checklist, simple one. Go on ticking each aspect of it. It will be shortly in public domain, maybe a week's time or so.
That's brilliant. So I can go back to my old avatar and say in breaking news, Justin, Police Commissioner says SOP is now in place. I think that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant initiative by our tech-savvy commissioner. Now I want to bring in Joanna to ask a question to the commissioner. I mean, the commissioner is an extremely friendly officer, somebody I've known for over 2 decades, who also has 2 lovely daughters. Joanna, would you like to address a question directly to the commissioner? Because we believe in empowerment and this is a platform for you, for children. Joanna, would you like to ask the commissioner a question directly? Anything that you'd like on POCSO or on your safety in school?
Commissioner, I would like to ask you a question on, like, suppose I've undergone I've been sexually assaulted. How immediate would the action be that you would assure me?
Well, this immediacy part is immediate. That's ASAP. That's it. Like the information comes in. If there's any delay, it's part of police basically. Right? Otherwise, the moment it comes and for this particular stuff, even a victim need not complain. On behalf of victim, somebody can complain, and we go in. Victim never needs to come to police station. She basically is, you can say he also in this case, but she basically in your case. We come to your place based on convenience of yours. The officers coming in need not come in uniform. We don't try to bring press vehicle in. Examination is there. There are different processes are there. As far as immediacy, it is ASAP. It should be immediate thereafter. There's no, the time gap, whatever is there is the part of police lag, but it shouldn't be there.
Okay. Sir, if I may, another question, based on the emerging pattern, you mentioned 230 cases in Chennai in the last 6 months. Would you say the occurrence is highest in schools or homes or in other public places? Has there been any analysis of these cases?
Yes, Sanjay, actually, this is one aspect which we are working on. Crime against women is one of the 7 verticals we've identified in city police to work. And crime against women and children is one of the vertical actually. We are basically also working this aspect with certain pockets, geographical location pockets where socio-economic weak class or maybe a bit deprived class is located. So we have found that the ratio of offenses in homes and neighborhood is much more than schools. Schools or other places, public places, is not that prevalent as our homes and the acquaintances in POCSO where the number of cases are high.
Okay, that's another big takeaway, and I would say headline from this webinar where the commissioner says the prevalence is much higher in homes, perhaps involving an uncle or some acquaintance in the family. People, they don't really view with suspicion initially, but these are the red flags that. Mr. Kumaresan, I believe you wanted to ask the commissioner a question. I mean, let's be brief because I promised him that we will only ask him a few questions because he has a hectic schedule. So if you can be very brief, please.
No, I'm not asking for a question. I just wanted to appreciate that the Commissioner of Police. In fact, we intercept with the Judiciary Academy recently. We conducted a training to improve the quality of the investigation for all the police officials along with other judicial officials across the state. And then having seen that, and we have received a letter from Commissioner of Police to the Judiciary Academy to look at the programs to even other police officials for the state. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that the judiciary is planning and we will be taking it up. Definitely. Just especially particularly the quality of the investigation report. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I know you've really put yourself out of the way to join this webinar. Thank you very much. And I quite like the interaction between Joanna Joshua, a school student, and the police commissioner, and his very reassuring reply to all, not just to Joanna, but to all the other students and parents watching this, to have words of assurance from the Chennai Police Commissioner, Mr. Shankar Jiwal, that action will be immediate on all your complaints. Action and investigation will be immediate. Thank you, sir, very much for joining us on this webinar.
Thank you, Sanjay, and I must appreciate for having you organize this webinar. I see Justice Vimla there, I see Sudha Ramalingam there, I see other people who are of prominence and definitely will contribute pretty well to the entire interactions of yours. Thank you so much, all of you, for being part of this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Let me go across to Justice Vimla, ma'am. Ma'am, another glaring omission in is the statutory timeline to report incidents to the police. There was a case in point, Chhattisgarh High Court, in fact, held that the head of the institution must be entitled and should be allowed sufficient and reasonable time to find out the correct facts by making an inquiry at the institutional level before reporting the matter. In your opinion, what would be a reasonable time frame, ma'am, for an institution? Let's say a school gets a complaint about a teacher. What would be a reasonable time for them to actually conduct an inquiry and to report it to the police? Because the Act does not give a timeline.
Sir, the nature of the incident that is complained of as child sexual abuse is very secret. And it is mostly within the knowledge of either the teacher and the student. Many of them may not be knowing directly, except saying that they have been seen together, maybe circumstantial evidence they may be telling about. Entirely, it depends upon the veracity of the statement of the child itself. It may not require much time, maybe a matter of hours, not even days. I would say hours is enough to understand whether the thing alleged has taken place or not. And therefore, on this count, I don't think it is justifiable to take so much of time on that.
So what would it be 24 hours, ma'am? Would that be reasonable?
More than enough. 24 hours, more than
24
enough.
hours. So if let's say a complaint is made against a serious complaint made against a teacher, or perhaps a senior teacher of the school, within 24 hours, they should have an inquiry, and then perhaps if there is prima facie evidence, they should suspend the person immediately, right?
Definitely, sir. Considering the nature of the allegations made, it should be decided whether he should be placed under suspension. If it is child sexual abuse, certainly, because the other students will be afraid of approaching. Normally, one thing we should understand, normally our students treat teachers as their guru. To parents or more than the parents. Normally, they won't be inclined to come out with those cases unless there is some element of truth in it. Considering those circumstances, we should understand that yes, there is something wrong. And maybe we have to proceed only on these lines.
Absolutely. Joanna, I want to bring you in here again. Are you aware, or are your classmates aware that victims of abuse have legal protection of their identity? Are you aware of this? That your identity cannot be revealed?
Yes, I was aware, but only a few months back I was aware because of the awareness program that we had like a few months ago, but not a few years ago.
Okay, remember this, it's like a quiz question, section 23 of POCSO. Section 23 protects your identity. Okay, section 23, that's an important thing that you can remember. Bharati, I want to bring you back in here. Are school authorities also aware that, under the Criminal Procedure Code, when it comes to, let's say, questioning teachers, that under the Criminal Procedure Code, 161 or 60 clause 1 of the CRPC, the Criminal Procedure Code, no girl child or lady or a male child below the age of 15 or a man above 65 years can be summoned to a police station. Are you aware of this?
Not some years ago, but with so much happening last 6 months, I'm reading so much about it, the awareness is being generated.
Okay, so that now you're aware that people in these age groups cannot be summoned to a police station. Women cannot be summoned to a police station. What about production of documentary evidence? They ask you, we want records, we want a complaint, we want to see these documents, attendance registers. That also, are you aware that you don't necessarily have to physically go? You can even send it through anyone from messenger to the police station.
I think this webinar is making me aware of all that.
Okay.
But once you're done with this, Sanjay, I would like to make a point.
Yes, please.
On the flip side, if it's okay with the prestigious audience.
No, please, please.
One thing which I want the children to know is, they know they have to complain, must have the confidence, but there have been certain situations when very rarely, of course, suppose a child dislikes a teacher for godforsaken, whatever reason it may be so. They should not take advantage of the situation, make a complaint. So we as teachers, parents have to be very, very cautious when we are doing that part of the investigation. Because
how do you draw the line? That's very important what you raise. How do you draw? You're talking about vendetta. Let's say a teacher gives the student less marks, or the student also may have some grudge against the teacher for whatever reason, we don't know. Where do you draw the line there? How do you draw the line between what is vendetta and what is, a genuine victim?
I think the past history of the child and talking to the child and the teacher as such, and having a long talk will help sort out this. But
let's see how will our judge, how will Justice Vimla view this?
That will be great.
Ma'am, Lordship, how would you view this? He's making an important point there. How do you draw a line, make a distinction between what could be vendetta and what could be a genuine complaint?
Sir, I have an apprehension whether a student will go to the extent of making allegation regarding sexual abuse, even in cases of vendetta. In cases of vendetta, they may say that they were using the caste name, they physically assaulted me, molested me, insulted me, this, that. But I don't think the children will imagine child sexual abuse. It is not, not at all possible to imagine because we don't discuss the aspect of sex at all. It is a taboo in our society. We don't understand that concept at all. Many of them do not understand.
Today's children, do you think that applies to today's kids?
No. They are to some extent exposure to internet and other things. They may know, but to the extent of making allegations of this sort, whether they will go to that extent, I have my own doubts.
Okay, that's interesting.
Practically, they may know.
And ma'am, it's just an extreme case of thought. so that, the teaching community also feels a little protected and safeguarded, because we as teachers now, though we deliver our lessons and all, we're extremely cautious of what we speak and what we do and how we go about.
So, Bharti, I must point out here, see, there are good teachers and there are bad teachers. There are teachers like you who people would feel confident to come and confide in. And there are teachers who will misbehave. In fact, a lot of jokes, what was considered a joke in the yesteryears is today taken very seriously. Earlier, there used to be a Tamil Nadu government order which permitted corporal punishment up to 6 cuts on the hand. I remember doing a story on NDTV many years ago. Today, students are sensitive. You can't indulge in corporal punishment today. In fact, even in the Juvenile Justice Act, there's a very clear, even the RTI Act, there's very clear provision that corporal punishment is not acceptable. But good old days, it used to be acceptable. And in fact, I know of cases where parents would come and tell the teachers, he's not doing his homework, he's not getting center in mathematics, beat him. Today, you can't do that. So the rules have changed over the years. Let me bring in fact, that question that you raised, and Justice Vimla also very rightly put in perspective for us. Sudha Ramalingam ma'am as a senior lawyer, how do you view this? This one is, on one hand, people looking up to teachers as God. On the other hand, people accusing teachers. Justice Vimla makes a valid point there, saying that could a student go to the extent of making such a serious charge against a teacher if it is not true? How do you view this, ma'am?
See, good old days, I used to think no woman will lie. All women are right. No, and it's only a man who is always wrong. So I never used to appear for a man. But later on, things changed and I understood what reality is. So reality is either way. It's definitely not that all children are honest and all teachers are wrong, or the other way around. There are instances where children are also manipulative. I feel that children these days know much, much, much more than what we think they know. Everything is at the tip of their hands, fingers now. So they are able to understand many things which we did not at that time understand. And there's also this instance of experimenting. Teenage children would definitely want to experiment on many things. And it's not just, I'm not just talking about the teacher-student relationship. I'm talking about the larger issue of POCSO here. So what happens is, in their anxieties or in their with their curiosity, they indulge in also voluntary relationships. So making all these things as very serious mandatory offenses with no leewage or room for even the judiciary or the prosecution to interpret it and give some benefit of doubt, and also counsel these children and see that they are not stamped as offenders or accused, is also essential, I feel. So I don't think all students are going to be very honest, will never tell lies, and neither are all teachers perfect. And I'm myself a victim of my teachers actually depriving me of my minimum marks and detaining me. So these are things which have happened not today. I'm talking about 2 years back.
There was no Sudha Ramalingam to fight for them then, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't know. I had friends who fought for me, including Mr. B. Kumar, the senior academic.
Okay.
So there have been instances. So this is something which is very, very delicate. We'll have to see and find out which is true. And that is why with the first question that you asked me, I said we need not have this amendment to the law. See, when you get in amendments where it is all tightly fitted in, then there is no scope of interpretation at all. So we'll have to definitely give some room and leverage for those who are going to be listening to these complaints, investigating, and also trying these cases. Should be given some room for
as you were speaking, ma'am, as you were speaking, Danya Elizabeth, I presume, parent, made a valid point saying that it should be mandatory for every school to have a counselor.
Yes.
Like you have a PT teacher and all that, you need to have a counselor as well, and this should be made mandatory. I think that's a good suggestion.
In fact, CBSE has made it mandatory for all our schools to have a counselor. A school counselor is a must for all CBSE schools.
But the counselors should be well-trained counselors. The counselors should be well-trained counselors.
Yes. And also about corporation schools and other government schools. That's more important because a lot of these things can be swept under the carpet there, and the students are not that empowered there to really question authorities there. Let me bring in Justice Vimla back here. Ma'am, there was a furor in the country over that Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court, that skin-to-skin, no skin-to-skin contact judgment where they let off an offender rather lightly in that appeal. this whole skin-to-skin contact argument. And in fact, in one of my columns, I'd also written that, would then, if a person who uses, a condom and performs a sexual offense, would that also then be entitled to the same leniency? Was that an aberration, ma'am, or do you think it's a reflection of the larger insensitivity that perhaps exists in sections of our judiciary?
We should admit certain things, sir. Unless we admit, we will not be able to correct ourselves. It was an unprecedented judgment in the sense that it was a dangerous precedent to follow. Unwarranted consequences are likely to follow. As you pointed out, if the concept that skin-to-skin contact is essential is promulgated, then doctors, for example, I'm telling, not that I'm blaming doctors, doctors can use very well, they can use the gloves, enjoy the whole body, then they will say that they have not committed any offense. It will, in fact, if this judgment is to be accepted, it will amount to promoting the child against the crime against the child and not reducing that, or not a question of punishing it. Very, very, very unfortunate judgment.
We take that as an aberration, because I know most of the judges are sensitive, and and we've had some landmark judgments really. In fact, when you were there as well, Madras High Court. Sudha Ramalingam, ma'am, again, want to sort of split hairs a little over the wording of the Act POCSO. Section 7, ma'am, defines sexual assault. Now, it talks about whoever touches the private parts of children watching this. Whoever touches the private parts of children or does any act with sexual intent which involves physical contact. However, the term physical contact is not defined in POCSO. The term physical contact is not defined in POCSO, and like earlier I pointed out about knowledge, it says it should be covered under IPC, Criminal Procedure Code, Juvenile Justice Act. That term doesn't figure in those enactments as well. So how does one actually define physical contact in the light of that skin-to-skin judgment?
As you also and Justice Vimala rightly pointed out, it is an aberration. And it's not only that, this Act also speaks about penetrative and non-penetrative assault and sexual harassment, and also on pornography. So this is something which I keep repeating, Sanjay. I feel that definition should not be all-inclusive. You should ensure that this definition can be interpreted. That's the reason why we need not also be looking at the General Process Act or others for every word to be interpreted by way.
What happens, in my opinion, my humble submission is that when there is a leeway for interpretation, the person who actually gets the benefit is the one who can afford a better lawyer. In which case, the defense lawyer and some poor public prosecutor may not be able to really withstand that. And that is why that's perhaps one of the reasons why, because of this interpretation and loosely worded terms or the lack of proper definitions, that convictions don't really happen.
But the judge must be. Tell me, go ahead.
Sorry, ma'am. You
go ahead, please.
No, what I wanted to tell you is the judge will be a better interpreter than a lawyer's interpretation. Lawyer's interpretation will be judged by the judge, and then the final interpretation is going to come only from judiciary. And therefore, the word should be elastic. As much as it is elastic, we can make it suitable to the particular circumstance. If that is not possible, supposing if traveling on bus is said to be an offense, if not, the train is also included in every vehicle should be included in the definition. That is not possible. If vehicle is a common term, whatever is moving, we should be able to include it by way of interpretation only. Only interpretation will use you scope for doing justice. That is what I felt.
Let me bring in Mr. Kumaresan here. Mr. Kumaresan, there was another case that was equally horrifying, and it sort of struck too close to home. The case of a dastardly rape of a child for over 7 months in an apartment complex in Chennai, some couple of years ago. Now, the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2018 had addressed this collective cry for justice, and it inserted 376AB, which prescribes a minimum punishment of 20 years rigorous imprisonment. Do you feel that capital punishment for heinous crimes such as rape of children would perhaps address this collective cry for justice?
Sanjay, it's a very good question, but now we are in the era of restoration justice, right? We have been slowly, we are talking in all those states. How do we, give an option and work on the area of restoration? That is the kind of activity that comes. It is debatable. Still, I think
Kumaresan, your audio seems to be breaking. I'll take that to Mrs. Sudha Ramalingam right now. Your audio seems to be breaking. We'll let you figure that out in a bit. Sudha, ma'am, I know you oppose the death sentence on the ground of no proven deterrence. We've had you on several shows in the past, and as a human rights activist, you're well within your rights to actually oppose that. But what, in your opinion, could be an alternative measure, ma'am, to instill fear of the law? Because there is a possibility, I admit, of perpetrators killing their victims due to the death penalty. What is the alternative deterrence, ma'am, for such heinous crimes?
Life sentence, and life to be complete life, no remissions at all. So that would be the deterrence, and I think that is better than even the capital punishment, because by way of capital punishment, the man just dies. That's all. He does not really has a chance to even ruminate about what he has done and reform also. So as you rightly said, I'm against death penalty in all circumstances, under all circumstances, and life should be life, and that is there in this act also after the amendment.
Justice Vimla, ma'am, the Supreme Court in that Nirbhaya case that held that the measure of punishment in a given case must depend upon the atrocity of the crime, the conduct of the criminal, the defenseless and unprotected state of the victim, and the punishment should fit the crime so that the courts reflect public abhorrence of the crime. Public abhorrence. And it suggested drawing up a balance sheet of aggravating and mitigating circumstances. Do you think capital punishment would reflect that public abhorrence, or would you sail along with Mrs. Sudha Ramalingam because she's an activist as well and she has her views, her strong views on the subject? Do you think capital punishment for the rarest of rare cases, not for all cases, rarest of rare cases, that will still act as a deterrent, ma'am?
Yes, sir. I am not, personally speaking, I am not against death penalty. But death penalty, grant of death penalty alone is going to reduce the crime against children. That is the only question. And in Hasini's case, it is my bench which confirmed the death sentence upon the accused. And even during that time, we don't feel comfortable to confirm this death sentence. So many ifs and buts. What if not? Too many questions on too many nights. And only then, maybe after 15 days to 20 days only, we were able to come to a definite conclusion. And we don't say that we live in a very perfect society. Starting from birth till the death, the societal intervention is too many, and we are exposed to so many distractions in the society. And what is that we are doing to reduce the crime against children, or reduce at least this kind of offenses? It is horrifying. It is terribly, terribly disturbing us to show that even the 7-month-old child born yesterday, what is it? Are we animals? Or are we human beings? That is what is bothering us a lot. The collective efforts, collective steps, and in a multi-directional way, we have to find out solutions, not necessarily this death penalty alone. In the implementation part, what I would like to say, implementation is more important than the law itself. As pointed out by Justice Krishna here, it is only a socially sensitized judge, socially sensitized to stakeholders. If we all join together, we will be able to reduce. Instead, I would say it is not only reduction, it is prevention is better than cure, will apply to crime against children than reducing it or any other way. Prevention is better because of the nature of the offense, nature of the childhood, and nature of the problem associated with the trial of these child victims. But better that we should focus on that.
Lordship, what would you suggest? How should we make the judicial process more child-friendly? Because many courts are said to have vulnerable witness deposition rooms. Victims interact with judges or prosecutors, and the process can be lengthy and tedious. Do you think prosecutors should be sensitized, and there must be better coordination between victims and prosecutors, because seldom do they spend actually sufficient time with the victims? In your opinion, as an eminent retired judge, how can we make the process more child-friendly?
First of all, I would like to read a poem where how the child feels in a system where too many stakeholders are involved, and then I will answer your question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the poem reads like this. I'm just reading the poem. I asked you for help and you told me you would. If I told you the things my dad did to me, It is a case where the child is molested and sexually abused by the father. Mother is the only witness. A social worker is supporting her. In this scenario, this poem comes. You asked me to trust you, and you made me repeat them to 14 different strangers. I asked you for privacy. You sent 2 policemen to my school like I was the one who was being busted. I asked you for help, and you gave me a doctor with cold hands who spread my legs and stabbed me just like my father. I asked you for confidentiality, and you let the newspaper get my story. I asked you for protection, and you gave me a social worker. Do you know what it is like to have more social workers than friends? I asked you for help, and you forced my mom to choose between us. She chose him, of course. She was scared and she had a lot to lose. I had a lot to lose too. The difference is you never told me how much. I asked you to put an end to my abuse. You put an end to my whole family. You took away nights of hell and gave me days of hell instead. You have changed my private nightmare into a very public one.
Beautiful. I think that's such a tearjerker, and I think that's such a beautifully written that you can sense the pain of the child. You know, that poem. Thank you so much, Justice Vimla, for sharing that with us. And I was asking you, going back to my question about what can be done to make the courts more child friendly.
Yes, sir. When we say we are friendly with the child should not feel that just like an accused, everybody is treating the child. When I say I'm the judge, I'll make the friend feel child friendly. I should not have a dice at all first. The platform, the very appearance should not be threatening to her. The very appearance should give her an impression, yes, this is a place where I will be free to ventilate all my grievances. This is a place where I am treated with respect. This is a place where I am trusted. This is a place where I am fully understood. This is the kind of feeling we should have. This kind of child-friendly feeling can be given only if the presiding officer is very, very sensitive to the nature of this child sexual abuse. It has a long-lasting impact upon the mind of the child. It is going to spoil her life throughout unless it is redressed at least in the place where she is asking and pleading for justice. Number one is the presiding officer. The law provides ample protection. The questions shall not be asked directly to the child. It must come rooted only through the judge. The public prosecutor should be sensitive enough, and he must not have the feeling of winning a case. Winning, losing does not matter at all. The childhood should have the feeling that the child is trusted. That is the most important thing than the result of the case. Then the defense lawyer should also understand that the humiliating questions, pressurizing questions, threatening questions shall not be asked because he is a child of the nation, not the child of X or Y or Z. It's a child of the nation. The defense lawyer should also understand that sufficient protection must be afforded so that the victim have no opportunity of looking into the accused at all because she shall not feel threatened by the accused. And no, nothing should bother her from disclosing the thing. Nothing should bother her from expressing all her feelings, all her problems, all her sufferings. And if she is treated like that, if the protection afforded under the act is followed, then I think the child will feel that she is treated in a friendly manner and she will be able to disclose whatever she wants to say. So we should give complete opportunity to the child to disclose. When a child friendly, when we speak about, I remember a case in Bangladesh, where it is a very small case. Facts are very, very simple. The child is subjected to sexual abuse. She is aged about 7. She is produced before the magistrate. She profusely cries. Cry is the language of the child. We can't blame the child. We can't expect the child to give an application to the magistrate. The mother was also there. Mother also had no language. She was also crying because of the pain she was suffering. The question for the magistrate was whether to send this girl to the asylum or send the girl along with the parent. That was the only thing. The magistrate unfortunately sent the child to the protective home. The mother was telling the media persons that what is your law? The magistrate did not even ask me a single question. He should have asked me what I want. I would have told him, if the judge had asked me that question, I would have told him that I want my child back. better than the mother, who else can give better protection for the child? Why the girl was sent to protective home? So many things was outburst. She was crying, and then the matter went to Bangladesh Supreme Court. Bangladesh Supreme Court said under Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of Child, the magistrate is bound to take into account the views of the child. What is the view of the child? The cry. The cry must be treated, should have been treated as an application by the child. That is the view of the child. The view of the child is she wants to be with the mother. This view should have been respected by the magistrate, but unfortunately the magistrate has not done this. We set aside the order and ask the police to hand over the child to the parent. See how the interpretation comes. Like that, judiciary must be sensitive enough to understand the child is by nature, it is voiceless, speechless, not in a position to understand. The child do not understand what has happened to her is legally wrong. Whether what is happening to her, the child is not able to visualize, not able to express. Too many problems are there for the child. Then the judge must be sensitive to that extent to understand the problem of the child. Then the question of being friendly with the child may remain satisfied to a certain extent.
Absolutely, that's so well put, Ahmed. Really, thank you for sharing that very, very heartbreaking poem. Thank you so much, Justice Vimla. Bharti, if I can go back to you, do you think martial arts self-defense classes should be made part of the curriculum in schools? Right now, it's only an extracurricular activity.
Very, very necessary. Not just PT, not just game, but self-defense both for girls and for boys. I do not see a gender bias here. Apart from having confidence in teachers, parents, and peers, it's very important that the child has confidence in himself and herself. So martial arts is definitely a welcome and a must.
It's one thing to teach them the march past, how to march and do drill, but actually what's really going to help them, like for instance, Krav Maga, which is an Israeli, martial art. Maybe, so you're saying all school boards should actually have this as a part of the curriculum?
Absolutely.
Okay, Joanna, would you be comfortable with this martial arts? I think you already know some martial art, right? Oh, is it gymnastics?
No, that's gymnastics.
Okay.
I agree.
Comfortable with martial arts? That all girls and boys should be taught martial arts in school as a compulsory subject?
Yes, I believe that we should make martial arts a compulsory subject, like how we have games period in PE. We have to make martial arts so that, as ma'am said, we have confidence in ourselves that we can protect ourselves apart from all the other people that we trust can protect us.
Okay. Now on that note, let's throw the floor open for questions from the audience. Parents, teachers, students like Joanna, any of your classmates who've logged in, Joanna? Please feel free. This is your session. Please feel free, feel safe. You can ask any question. You can direct it to any particular panelist, or you can ask me and I will direct it to them. Feel free to open up and ask us any questions on the subject. Joanna, do you have any questions to ask the judge or the lawyer or the UNICEF activist or the school principal? To ask the police commissioner a question, do you have any question?
Not as of now, but if I do, I will ask.
But actually, Sanjay, I wanted to add on this.
Yes, Mr. Kumaresan, yes.
See, recently, the last 3 months, Judge Ma'am proposed that the Tamil Nadu judiciary, the first time in the last 6 years, just to improve the convergence prevention and the response action of the various stakeholders. The first time, the public prosecutors, as Commissioner said, that crime against women and children, that ADSPs, Juvenile Justice Board, principal magistrates, also judges, and also the person who's from the government who's in charge for the interim compensation fund, LPUs. Together, we have ran through a kind of series of workshops, all 3 centers, and realizing that we wanted to see that how do we improve this quality of the services to the children. For your information, the first time I think the government of Tamil Nadu issued a GO the last year that interim compensation, they don't have to go through that police or a DLS office. Actually, they can even straight away go to that social defense. Right now, ever since that GO is issued, and we have reviewed all the 3 state reviews, the district reviews, absolutely nil. So that is a very welcome move by the government of Tamil Nadu and currently, and we are also looking at it. I think the government has again submitted a request to the Finance Commission to ask for another 14 crores to look at this before the GO, the pending which is there from 96 to 98 cases. Hope to solve it. I think judiciary is making it progressively, and also we are also working with them and see that it will be addressed in a month's time. So I would see, the kind of very the JJ committee of the High Court and also Judiciary Academy, they're taking it as very personally, and they're looking at it as a program. In fact, there are some leftover even panel advocates of the JJBs. We have ran through all these workshops in all the places. That High Court Judiciary Academy is there in the state. And then first time they were also got exposed to that. Whatever the Sudha ma'am and then our judge ma'am was saying, that all those points which have been covered in those trainings, and I hope to see some kind of a response, very positive in the coming months together. And these programs are not going to end with the one time. Then we are going to have a hand-holding and mentoring support, an on-site support mechanism also. The Judiciary Academy is planning through their research. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Konesi. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I want to just add one thing. As far as the Child Welfare Committee is concerned, we should also bring them into the focus. What happened a few months before is one of the newspapers reported about 2 children during the COVID helping their mother to vent tea in some government offices. So when that was reported, the Child Welfare Committee in Coimbatore district, I think, immediately took these 2 children and put them in an institution. Institutionalized them because it was the child labor, So the entire thing was the children were actually helping the mother, who was actually a single mother. Then we had to really go address this issue and then silently take the children out, of course, using the advocacy skills more than even going to court, because going to court, we'll have to, the process is quite cumbersome and expensive also. And during COVID, how it was, filing itself was a big problematic. So in the over-seriousness about protecting the children, what they did was institutionalizing the children without even knowing that they were only silently helping the mother very voluntarily, and it was not child labor at all. So where do you draw this Lakshman Rekha? I think UNICEF should also address this with the Child Welfare committees.
Thanks, ma'am. I completely agree, ma'am. And we are waiting for the new set of members to onboard. You know that the reasons GO is that all the qualification is changed, that you know also very well. Right. Some of the members got their own childcare institutions. So they're referring to their own childcare institutions. Just to avoid all those things, the new recruitment, the order has been issued to all the magistrates to look at district collectors.
Yes.
To look at the recruitment immediately. Once they complete it, and completely agree with it, even the issue of order, there is a lot of problem with them. I think in another month or 2, we will be getting all the new set of CWC members in the state. Once they come on board, and we will take it up, definitely.
We have a question. To Vidya, Advocate Vidya.
Sanjay, I have this question. The POCSO Act says whoever commits, the word whoever is used. So does that include peer-to-peer sexual abuse as well? So would a child be booked under POCSO if he or she sexually abuses his friend or a junior in school? That is one part of the question. The second part is related to it. There could be, teenage love, adolescents in love. So would, a young couple, would they also be booked under POCSO?
Sudha ma'am, you want to take that? The term whoever. You have to unmute, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah, Vidya, you're absolutely right. Whoever includes everybody. That's the reason why even in the beginning, I think I did address this issue itself about children experimenting, especially teenagers.
But wouldn't this be a child in conflict with the law, ma'am?
It will be a child. That's why, but that is the reason why I said we'll have to think about these definitions, also about how strict it should be, how the interpretation should also, these definitions should give room for also considering the circumstances under which the child commits the act. I do not call it an offense. I call it an act. So the 2 children, if both of them are children, if both of them are below 18, what happens? It is possible. It's not at all impossible, especially children are attaining puberty much earlier these days, and then they have access to all information about sex at the fingertips, with the smartphones at their disposal, with the internet at their disposal. So what happens is the children have a curiosity. So through that curiosity, they do experiment. Such experiments could definitely be considered mandatory rape too. So are we going to punish these children? Are we going to address these children with counseling facilities and channelize them? This is something that is very important, especially when you say you've got to remove these children immediately from the schools. What happens? Okay, well, the child's education goes off, the child's future goes off, and it was not an offense as such. They did an experiment, which is a natural process, a natural biological process. So are we going to call these crimes? Are we going to call these offenses? I think people will have to also rethink about all these things when we start talking about defining these offenses, more so when there are shrill voices calling for only brandishing people, arresting people, putting them in the jail, go to the extent of also be joyful about an encounter death too. So I think it's high time we also become compassionate and think about these children, not merely as offenders, but also as children who are indulging in a sort of an experiment, which is very, very natural because of their biological needs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. I think we've completely run out of time, but I think this was a very, very fruitful discussion. So many takeaways. Police Commissioner breaking news in the webinar saying that a standard operating procedure will be put in place very soon. That it's still in a draft stage on POCSO, on registration of cases with a complete checklist. We've also agreed, there was unanimity here when it came to the suggestion on self-defense classes being part of the curriculum. Joanna Joshua, in fact, talking about how she would like to confide in her parents first. Both Justice Vimla and Mrs. Sudha Ramalingam, in a very pertinent manner, explained how parents, and even Mr. Kumaresan, how parents need to be friends of their children so that children can confide in them and cases can be reported well on time. Thank you very much. I think this was a very, very meaningful discussion, diametrically different from what we witnessed at 9 p.m. on national television. I had to say that. Thank you very much, panelists, Justice Vimla. I thank Mr. Shankar Jiwal, my good friend, for joining us earlier, Mr. Kumaresan, Sudha Ramalingam ma'am, and Joanna for staying up. I know you're in the middle of your NEET classes, but you made time for us. Thank you very much. I think this was what I would definitely call a dream panel tonight. Thank you very much for making time on a Monday evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Only two things in 2 minutes. I will just finish it off.
Please,
during 2015, the world leaders have united together, and they have said by 2030 they would end violence against them. And they have given strategies, 7 strategies. It is called Inspire. Just you can just take note of it, and people will be very easily they can find out what are the terms meant and how it could be the Inspire. The 7 steps can be used for preventing violence against children and youth. That is one thing. And the other thing is about what Madam Sudha Ramalingam was telling, that the adolescent Romeo-Juliet cases are also booked under POCSO, and that is not warranted. I completely agree with her. In fact, I participated in a conference where I said the age must be reduced from 18 to 16. It is justifiable because under the Convention on the Rights of Child, Article 41 says, if the law of the country could better protect it otherwise than by invoking this Convention on the Rights of Child, it should be done. That is what Article 41 reads. Therefore, no difficulty in reducing the age. Otherwise, the consensual sexual act must be looked into in a different perspective. The impact of this kind of prosecution is explained by Teddy Bear Clinic versus Minister of Justice, reported in 2013, is at AACC page 35. A very beautiful judgment. I would request all of you present here to go through that. That will give the complete picture about prosecuting those adolescent exploring the sexual experiences. And I think the law must be changed so that we will not brand our own children as criminals and we will not make them criminals. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Lordship. Thank you
Sanjay,
very much for your time.
Thank you so much. I think we as teachers, principals, and mothers, this was a very, very informative and useful one to look at children in a more empathetic way, at the same time, give them more courage and confidence. So I'm sure my teachers and my students have joined me here. It's been a great webinar. Thank you so much for this. And to all the prestigious panel, I'm really, really humbled to know you and your viewpoints on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.